importance of the natural range of variation. And I think this is what I'm trying to do with my research, is put it in context. How many birds would we have ever had caused by fire trajectories? And this is a long-term simulation of 1,000 years, and this is the size of the ovenbird population I expected probably occurred over time due to fire. Now, when we look at birds in northeastern Alberta and in the oil sands region, if I take what ALPAC's going to do, and I say, this is the bottom of the range of natural variation caused by fire, so I expected the minimum amount of birds that would be out there would be about 600,000 due to fire. And this is what ALPAC's going to do to the ovenbird. That's an approximation, but that's the likely scenario. That's what the energy sector is going to do if we just include habitat loss, so things like the oil sands mines, the well pads. If I throw in the facility avoidance noise, we get to there. And I throw in that fence effect I talked about, we get to there. So we're looking at a system where we probably are going to push it outside the natural range of variation. And what we're left with is trying to make some decisions about how many birds are going to be enough. So for me, what we've really been able to show so far is we've got a bunch of tools for you guys to use in planning. We know habitat loss is going to be an issue. Edge effects, they come, they go, some are positive, some are negative. And what we need to start working on is how much of a decline is actually acceptable. So I hope you guys will use these tools, and we'll go from there. So I'd like to thank a whole bunch of data and funding partners. I won't read them all because there's even another second page. With that, I hope I got time for questions. But as we're asking questions, I'm going to show what I call biologist porn. And this is some of the predation events you might see on boreal forest songbirds. And some of the critters that decide to eat stuff. So I will entertain questions while some people watch ugly movies.
Well, like several years ago, we used to hear a lot about like umbrella species or indicator species, and just thinking about it after Gord's talk, you know, grizzly bear was kind of touted as being an umbrella species, so that if you had a healthy population of bears, other species kind of below it on the food chain would be healthy too. So what do you think of that concept?
Well, I think, you know, it's a good question. Whether, like an umbrella species, because of its large home range size, like the grizzly bear, I think it encompasses, you know, a variety of habitats and environments that could exist. But in the case of grizzly bear, it's a great example. Early sterile habitat in general, with some patchiness, is going to support a good, healthy population of grizzly bears. There's enough specialization within some of the songbirds that you might have something that slips through the cracks. And Canada warbler is one that I would think is actually a good example. And some of the other species, they just are specialized enough that things that they need might not get met if we don't pay for it, I guess is my point. The vast majority of birds, however, yes, I completely agree. If you have a system where, you know, there's a dynamic enough world that of mature and young, you know, intermix together, you're going to support a lot of different bird species. But it's, I think what we have to start doing is looking for the ones that might not make it through that course filter type of bird. And yes, redback bulls, they like to chew and clear it up. Yes?
Would you ever see like getting to stage like a bird credit? Like, would you ever see such a scenario occurring? Like with habitat, like practices or anything like that?
The honest answer is I think it's seeing it already. If I took an example being, you know, the oil sands for right now, for example, when they are disturbing habitat, there is some discussion of no-net loss. So no-net loss of wetland is a very common idea. I believe that there might become more no-net loss. Scooping myself. No-net loss of specific species habitat. It's kind of a, that's not quite correct. There might be money put forward to recover habitat in certain places where we know you're going to disturb it somewhere else. So Alberta Conservation Association, for example, is working a lot with the energy sector to buy up more land, say, in Peace River country, for example, and it's intending to compensate for loss in the oil sands. So, and the idea there being, you know, the boreal itself is a big place with lots of activity, but it's still huge. But there's places in the boreal, places in Alberta where we have bigger conservation challenges than we do up north, for example, and then maybe we might move some of the dollars. And so the answer, I think, is happening. How effective it's going to be, I think, is still involved. All right, and with that. that, no more biology class for you.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I don't know if we've got PowerPoint loaded here or not. We're kind of a low-tech guy at the best of times, but policy management office, and we're doing a lot of new things here. As Dr. Bain said, it's time that we start integrating the knowledge and the expertise across the sector so that we can deal with cumulative effects. And not sure about the various degrees of background and knowledge of what's occurred to date with the creation of the single regulator for upstream oil and gas, oil sands, and coal. So my presentation is going to be fairly high-level, basic information. So for some of you, your eyes may cross because it's old news to you, but for others, hopefully it's useful. I've also left my business card with Chanel, and I think she'll make that available for anyone who wants to talk with more specific questions. We've been quite busy over the last number of weeks and months putting together our stakeholder consultations and whatnot. We've met with some members of the forest sector as well as the AFPA, and of course a lot of our oil and gas stakeholders as well, and general public. And it's been a fun roadshow getting across the province in the dead of winter, and now in the spring. We've been lucky that the bad weather we've had has missed us, but the perspective and the uniqueness in every part of this province is very humbling in a sense. I mean, I've been here all my life, but of course from the high river country, and we do things in this province, I think, with a great sense of pride no matter what we do, and that certainly translates across industry. So the purpose of the Alberta Energy Regulator, as it's going to be known, is to help government start to move towards a more integrated resource management system. And that's to balance all of the impacts on the landscape, environmental, economic, and social, and ensuring that what we're doing today isn't going to create major problems tomorrow. The components of the system are to start looking at how we can better integrate policy, to break down the silos and start sharing that information across sectors and across regulators and policymakers. And the first step in that is land use framework, and to deal with regional planning so that we can integrate policy at a macro scale, but at the regional level. Regulatory enhancement, and that's across sectors. Our work in the policy management office with the single regulator is really just a small piece of the regulatory enhancement, and that's something that's been happening for many years. Started probably back in the 90s when the consolidation of the various environmental statutes, the Environmental Protection Enhancement Act, and recent work as well with the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, Public Lands Act, and Forests Act. That's all part of they're all pieces of the same puzzle. And balancing that regulatory enhancement piece is the third-party monitoring, science-based data, and having that arm's length agency to provide credible scientific monitoring of how well the system's doing, or at least give us the data sets that can help us determine how well the system's doing. And then the fourth component of the system really is about doing Aboriginal engagement better and being more effective and timely in how we do that. So jumping into the regulatory enhancement project, in 2010 there was a task force of MLAs set up, and the driver at that time was competitiveness, and that spun out of the royalty review and so forth that occurred in 2008, 2009, really in response to the boom in the early part of the last decade. And the task force undertook a comprehensive review of the oil and gas regulatory system, and in consultations with a number of key stakeholders and First Nations across the province, what the task force second recommendation was to create a single regulator, and that will be the Alberta Energy Regulator, as it will be known. Third recommendation was to create clear public engagement processes so that we can have the policy discussion at the right time and start talking about whether or not a certain activity, development, industry, that kind of thing is a good idea before we actually get to the application stage. And so this will take time to develop and get good at it. I see it more as a process of continuous improvement rather than creating a system that's going to stay static. The next two recommendations are part of my branch, and that's to create a common approach to risk assessment and management. We're sort of in the early stages of that now. It's going to be a collaboration among industry, folks from the Energy Resources Conservation Board, who are going to be the core of the new regulator when it starts up in June, as well as some of the other sectors. As an example, Darren Tapp, who some of you may be familiar with, is my tech director counterpart in the forest management branch at CAPFT. He's involved as well with this project to sort of assess our systems that are in place and make sure that we're looking at the right control measures and critical control points in our framework of risk assessment and management across the whole system. And then, of course, the next recommendation tied to that are performance measures and actually help us measure how well the system's doing so that we can drive the policy agenda and make sure the system keeps improving. Sixth recommendation was to deal with a mechanism to address landowner concerns. We heard a lot, particularly from the White area, folks who were quite frustrated with agreements that they would make at the farm gate, and they just felt that there was very limited ability in the system to have those enforced. So the Policy Management Office, very high-minded language there, but really what we do is we manage that interface between government and the regulator. And the Regulatory Enhancement Task Force, what the task force heard loud and clear is the government had to be accountable for policy. And that meant developing timely policy that was integrated, responsible, and with that, you would have a regulator then who would be free to regulate and deliver that policy. But there needs to be that interface to communicate what the policy is, to allow the policy makers and their stakeholders to work on timely and effective policies and continuously improve that within their mandates, but then communicate that to the integrated regulator who's delivering that. So where you've got folks like Dr. Byrne and the various sectors, how you operationalize those tools and that scientific knowledge is really still going to be the responsibility of the departments in the government, like ESRD, like Aboriginal Relations, Municipal Affairs, and some of the other policymakers that affect oil and gas development in the province. And then it would be the Alberta Energy Regulator's job to deliver that policy in an integrated way. The Policy Management Office also will be sort of that forum to discuss policy issues, to bring them forward. And part of our role will be to supporting a coordinated approach to public engagement across the departments that deal with upstream oil and gas, oil sands, and the whole policy. So meetings like this and some of your other industry organizations and sectors, very important for us in our office to get out and make sure that we maintain those relationships and that discussion so that the cross-sector issues can still be brought forward to the energy side of things. So what we're working on, I mentioned that interface and that communication. When the new regulator begins operating, there'll be a policy access system that will allow industry, the regulator, and general stakeholders to see what policies apply to certain activities, regulated activities in the energy sector. And that's going to include all kinds of information from the land use side of things, the forestry side of things, biodiversity, sort of air, land, water, biodiversity mantra. We're also, as I say, working on the regulations to support the regulator. And part of that piece, of course, is policy and integration. So we're learning some good lessons and taking those forward see, I think, a phased approach to it. The new chair has been announced and appointed. He's been Jerry Prodi has been quite busy over the last month or so getting things in place. He's the chair of the transition committee and will also become chair of the new regulator. And his priorities are to make sure that the transition is as smooth as it can possibly be. Certainly our instructions in the regulation side of things are to prepare regulations that are seamless for the process. And so you're likely going to see a phasing in first of the ERCB work, and you'll have the new regulator with its new governance structure and whatnot in June, and then the additional work from the ESRD side of the oil and gas, oil sands and coal equation will start to be phased in over the coming months. So to be an independent arm's length agency, it's important. Not a government department, and that frees up government capacity to start working on policy and to accelerate some of the key policy pieces that we need to drive faster to an integrated model. And it's also important to note that the legislation doesn't include mineral tenure or surface rights board functions. When it's fully operational, this will be the scope of the energy regulator. And so in that first phase, beginning in June 2013, it's going to be those first 6 petroleum statutes that the regulator will be responsible for. And that certainly makes sense from a change management standpoint. It gives the core staff of the ERCB an opportunity to get used to the new model with subject matter processes that they're familiar with. And then over time, the remaining 4 environmental statutes will be rolled into the operations of the regulator. The mandate of the regulator is sort of that first step towards integration of the knowledge, and that's to provide for the safe, efficient, orderly, and environmentally responsible development of Alberta's energy resources. When it's fully operational, the regulator will also regulate the related disposition and management of public land, and that's what's related to energy resources. So you still have ESRD dealing with all the other non-sector, non-oil and gas sector, coal, resource management. We'll also deal with related protection of the environment, so reclamation certification, for example, at the end of the life cycle of the project would be the regulator that has that ability. And that's important too, from the integration standpoint, is you'll have a regulator involved in the full life cycle, for the full life cycle of the project. So when it comes down to certification at the end of the day, you don't have a regulator that's looking at one piece of the puzzle. And the compliance files and all of the other activities that take place over the course of that life cycle, well known and on file at a single integrated agency. And they'll also be able to issue water licenses and water approvals as well under the Water Act. So what the new regulator will look like is different from the current Energy Resources Conservation Board. You'll have an expert governance board, small board that's designed to be agile and expert in good governance. And separated from that is the decision-making function. So you'll have the chief executive officer who runs the day-to-day operations of the board, to whom the staff are accountable. And on the other side of the coin for appeals, hearings, that kind of thing, the adjudicated function, as I call it, there'll be a roster of hearing commissioners who aren't accountable to the board of directors. They have to be independent. They're accountable to CAPFT who appoints them. So it's a slightly different structure than the ERCB. What they'll be doing is the work of a regulator, whether that's ERCB today or the ESRD. Regulators do basically the same thing. They consider and decide applications, they monitor compliance, site conditions, effects on the environment, and they'll also oversee the closure, suspension, abandonment, reclamation, and remediation of facilities. One of those integration tools is set out the clear factors. And that's part of what our consultations are about that are occurring right now. And we're asking both industry stakeholders and the public, what should the regulator be considering? What does that sort of public interest mean to you? And the regulations then will set out quite clearly what those factors should be in some detail. Also providing for some flexibility, because one size does not fit all. But that's a key integration tool when you're talking about a multi-use landscape. It's not enough anymore just for siloed decision making. In terms of public participation in the process, opportunities for input, another key integration tool for cross-sector stakeholders is that the regulator has to provide public notice on receiving applications, which is different from today. Today, under the Directive 56, for example, there's identification for who's likely to be directly and adversely affected, and there's a requirement that the company consult with people within that radius. Whereas that notice piece has been expanded in the new act so that those who might be outside of that radius but who may have an interest in the application can then file a statement of concern. So in June, because this is a new piece, you're likely not going to see that public notice requirement to stand us up under familiar processes, but we're still talking with Albertans and key stakeholders about just how that public notice piece is going to work, and you'll see that in the coming months. So this talks about our regulations and what the regulations will be about. Key piece is the integration regulation. So how will those environmental statutes and the petroleum statutes, as I call them, be integrated within this regulator? So, for example, you'll see in some of the environmental statutes very clear steps to be taken for notice and things like that. Well, if those aren't up to the standard that the Responsible Energy Development Act sort of prescribes in terms of public notice and that kind of thing, we'll need to make sure that the regulator will provide that clarity that the regulator will follow its process. But importantly, because the statutes are brought in whole, ESRD and Energy, who has the other statutes, can still own that policy. So if there's minimum requirements, if there's big P public policy requirements in that legislation, the regulator is bound by that, just like the ESRD and ERCB decision makers are today. And then, of course, the participation side of things, and that's the extensive engagement that we're talking about in our consultations. And we've talked about in other sessions with a number of stakeholder groups, and that's the point I want to stress, is that the government department will still be making policy under those enactments that the regulator is going to be delivering. So we get hung up on the language of a single regulator, but really what we're doing on the environment file and the public lands file is adding a regulator to the landscape, another delivery system basically for that public policy. And the key is to remember that the systems sort of behind that to promote consistency in decision making and whatnot are going to be very important to deliver the integrated resource model the government is moving towards. So that's kind of my background. Do we have time, Chanel, for questions? If anyone has specific burning questions they want to ask, sure. Okay.
What do you see the net change in the amount of regulatory personnel with the new department?
Net change in terms of just FTEs?
Well, yeah, you've got, like right now, all sorts of different regulatory bodies, and you're going into one. Is it going to be more people, less people?
Yeah, that's not an easy question. The reality is within ESRD, there's a lot of work that's yet to be done. There's a lot of work that is not getting done because of capacity issues, because of the busyness. So with the addition of a second regulator, as I say, on that public lands file, the environment file, the regulator has to staff up and get their capacity to deliver the additional environmental work. So where it all shakes out in the end in terms of numbers, be policy differences in regions. The delivery is to be consistent across the province, that if a regional plan requires a certain thing in the Lower Athabasca region, for example, the delivery of that is to be consistent. If the rule across the province is one rule, then delivery of that one rule better be consistent delivery. And so that's critical, and one of the, I guess the tools and the strategies used by bringing in all those statutes and all the regulations whole. So remember, it's not just the statutes, but you get on the environment side and the regulations and codes of practice. ESRD still owns that, and so ESRD will be responsible for amending and approving the codes of practice, and it'll be the regulator that's bound by that. And I sense in your question too some undertones of the human factor and interpretation of some of that stuff, and that's always a challenge, because sometimes even though some of us are scientists, it's still an art, not a science once you get on the ground. But in terms of the basic standards, it's going to be the departments that own what those standards are. Yeah, so you won't see different standards across sectors, for example, for the same activity. Yeah.
Question here.
Sure.
One of the prime drivers when this was first rolled out was to reduce the time it takes to get large pools, since Alberta was lagging considerably in that regard. And during the consultation process, we had some examples tossed around, for example, a 2-year process now, and the folks from the government suggested maybe have a target of, say, 6 months as an example. Have you set those targets yet for what we can expect, realizing that it won't happen June 1st, but kind of timeline for that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's no, the question was the recognition when the task force went out that we needed to streamline and do things a little bit faster. The number thrown out at that time was it takes 2 years to do some major projects, and we'd like to get that down to 6 months in some cases. So that's the question. In terms of targets, there are no targets for reducing the time. We need to get the system up and running before we can really start to improve the system. And so what we've heard loud and clear across the province and doing the consultations on the regulations, it's not one size fits all. There's some subtleties behind that 2-year process. I think delay for the sake of delay is what we're trying to get away from. But if time needs to be taken to assess complex projects and that kind of thing, that's not something that government wants to shrink. But it's sort of that delay in the process, and when you go to multiple regulators, and one point's over here saying that's his jurisdiction, and one point's over there saying that's her job, that's what government's trying to cut the red tape on. Is that Dr. Passing? Yeah. There was a question here. Yeah, they are. The question was with the ERCB system being down, have we looked at integration of the systems and some of the issues? And the answer is yes, they're looking at that. Folks who are a lot smarter on that than I am are thinking about that. I can't even get the PowerPoint to work, so I'm not the guy, but they are working on it, they're aware of it. That's all I can say on that. The policy system that we're working on, for example, is an example of that, where it has to be able to go into whichever server or database or website where the policy lives and pull it out
I see multiple land managers, some with government, some with the regulator, who has ultimate decision-making authority.
Yeah, so matters within their jurisdiction, and that's, you know, the silos have been in place for a long time, and when we consult with the different silo, that's always been the question. The question over here was, from over here was, who, I guess, who breaks the tie? If you've got a biologist saying, no, we can't do this, or we've got a forest officer saying, yes, we have to do this, and then we add another regulator to the mix. That's basically it, Andrew. In terms of the tiebreakers, the tiebreaker is who has jurisdiction. And the challenge that we have with siloed decision making is just that, who breaks the tie. With the regulator, it's integrated, so it's going to be that decision maker who needs the courage to weigh the options, weigh the input, and then make a decision. Sort of make no mistake, they will make a decision. So like on the forestry side, where you'll have forest management branch, for example, approving the annual operating plan or what have you, just like that system, yes, lands, we hear you, yes, fish and wildlife, we hear you, but you know, we have to approve our sector's plan. So it'll be whoever has jurisdiction to make that decision. So if it's an energy resource activity, it'll be the regulator that ultimately decides based on the input and the best advice available. If it's forestry approval, they can take the input of the energy regulator if it's relevant, and ultimately it'll be the forestry regulator that makes that decision. And if it's the lands regulator, then they'll make that decision. Yeah, good question, though. Yes.
In follow-up to Andrew's question, how far-reaching is the single regulator in terms of oil and gas development? For example, like a camp or a sand and gravel that oil sands operators need? Are they going to have to deal with two people now? Are they how far-reaching does the single regulator go?
Yeah. So the question is, how far does the regulator's jurisdiction go? Where's that line between the Alberta Energy Regulator and ESRD in the future state? And that's still an open question. That's why we're going to be consulting after the first phase. So get the regulator stood up on June 1st with the energy statutes, and we're going to keep working to figure out where that line is drawn. But you're right, the line will be drawn somewhere. The test for what goes to the Alberta Energy Regulator, if you're looking for a rule of thumb, is if your activity requires an approval today from the ERCB, all of the related ESRD approvals that are connected with that activity will go with it. So, for example, access roads to a well site, sort of the obvious yes that would be in, but then you start talking about the trunk roads or the main access roads into an activity area. Those are the questions we have to answer over the coming months to see if it's going to be ESRD rather, or the AER that issues those. I think it certainly makes sense that if you're looking at a main sort of LOC that's used by forestry, aggregate, and the well sector, that it should be the primary land manager, the Public Lands Administration, dealing with that. But those are open questions right now. We're going to be talking with a lot of folks internally and externally about how we should make that work. Yeah. Go ahead.
You had said in your presentation that this whole new process doesn't deal with mineral tenure. So I was just wondering, is there any opportunity for public input at an earlier stage, like say before a coal lease is sold?
As the question, because mineral tenure is out of scope of the single regulator, the question is, will there be an opportunity for input before mineral leases or coal leases, for example, are sold? And we hear that in almost every session. Where's mineral tenure in this piece? I think, you know, it's fair observation that some mineral tenure kicks off the whole process, and you know that if a company's interested, they're certainly going to be interested in developing it as well. So it's a very good question, and mineral tenure is definitely on the policy radar. So AUC is still out for now, and I say for now because this is the first step in the integration process. So what the long term view might look like is still not formed yet. The culture side of things, historic resources, that is policy that we're going to have to be aware of. That's sort of a next phase item for us because the policy access system that I talked about is going to have to dig into some of those policies. I think Dr. Bain also talked about the migratory birds rules that the feds are coming up with. And so we are working on getting all of that other relevant policy into the policy access system so that it pulls it up and it's in one place when you search based on the filters that are there for the type of information you're looking for. So the culture side of things, rolling it into the regulator, that was the question. That's not part of it right now. So the developers will still have to go to culture to get that signed off. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, is there an opportunity for that service, I guess, to be provided to have somebody in-house with the regulator to make the decision on the historical resources side? Certainly an opportunity. It's not something we're working on right now. We're sort of taking the first steps, but the historical resources thing is huge, and we're quite aware of that. Yeah. I think there was one question. Sun's in my eyes over here. No? Okay. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
He has an amazing presentation called Being Caribou. And he traveled with a herd of caribou up north, and he ran alongside them, sort of like a farming mode kind of idea, talking about caribou instead of wolves. And really a fascinating presentation. And I took a bit of inspiration from there. We're not trying to be caribou, but we want to maybe get into their head a bit more. So the title of this is called Understanding Caribou. It's about a number of projects that Statoil is carrying out, some with industry partners. I'll get into that. And we're going to talk about primarily our scat dog detection program and how that spawned other research projects, and talk about some of the initial results. So just an outline of my presentation here, a little bit about the company, obligations that we have, collaboration, what research we're doing, our specific studies, there's 3 of them I'll talk about today, some of our results, and what this all means for caribou management, and the implications of the federal recovery plan for caribou released last year. So just briefly on Statoil, we have 4 core values that we talk about all the time. They're really important. We just had our CEO from Norway, because we're a state-owned oil company. Anyway, he was over last week and talked about them, and they are sharing. So today I'm sharing information with you. We're open, and we're going to tell you some of the things that maybe weren't such great findings. We're courageous, and for me I'm up here speaking for the team. And we're also supposed to be hands-on, and that's going to come later when I'm holding my beer afterwards. Statoil does operate around the globe in 38 different countries, and I can't remember the exact number of employees, but it's like 40,000 or something like that. And very high standards of transparency and community engagement, and actually Statoil Global was rated the top oil and gas company for transparency and that sort of thing. So a lot of core values there, and this translates into what we want to try and do to improve our operations. And just so we're clear here, this is to talk about oil sands. And I don't know if any of you follow the news, but a few years ago, Statoil was under a lot of pressure from Norwegians and Europeans not to enter oil sands because it's bad stuff, right? It's dirty oil, it's the dirtiest oil on the planet, all this stuff. Statoil was courageous in coming to Canada and buying North American Oil Sands Corporation, because they felt that we can do better. We can crack this nut and figure out how to get that resource out of the ground in a much more environmentally friendly fashion. So that's kind of what drives it here. So far it's proving to be a very big challenge, but there's a lot of work being done to crack that nut. And we have a lot of obligations to our shareholders in Europe, for example, as well as all our stakeholders, as well as all our approval commitments. But plain and simple, we want to make a difference, and we want to see if we can improve the way we manage our activities and reduce our impact to the environment. So on that note, we collaborate a lot, and there's a brand new collaboration organization in the oil sands called COSIA, which stands for Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. It's 14 companies joining together to do a better job and to make more efficient use of all the money we spend on research and that sort of thing. Among some of the things we work on is we fund the ILM chair partly, and it was great to hear Aaron Bain this morning talk about some of the bird studies, and so we were working with folks like Aaron and lots of others to enhance our programs and get the most out of our research. And then the key here, though, is to actually start doing stuff on the ground and try and get them into our operations, make a difference, test our assumptions, and keep moving on. So, what research are we doing? Well, I'll show you here. We've got, like I say, the 3 projects. So, first off is researching and monitoring caribou ecology in the lower Athabasca. So this is the scat dog detection program. And I want to make it really clear here that I'm speaking on behalf of the research team, which is Jonah Kime and Sam Wasser are the 2 key guys. Jonah's with Matrix Solutions here in Edmonton. Sam Wasser is with the University of Washington. Tim Shopik is with Statoil. Subhash is with U of A, I believe. Phil DeWitt and Jeremy Fitzpatrick are also with Matrix. And Mark Taper, I am not exactly sure. I think he's with U of A. Anyway, that is the team that did all the work. I'm just presenting the findings here on behalf of all of us. So on that note, one thing you have to remember about scat dogs, I don't know if any of you have heard of these before, but whenever you engage things like dogs or small children, it generally goes over really well. And that is true. It's true with this, and that's a small part of the reason we won a couple of awards here. But at these things, whenever you bring out the dogs or people see the dogs, they just kind of start swooning and it sways the boat maybe, I don't know. But it's a good story, but it's also some fascinating science. It's certainly not a be-all, end-all. It's not a magic bullet or anything, but I'll explain more about that. And one of the key points I'd like to make here is that we use science to inform our management. So one of our goals here is really to make sure that we've got the science buttoned down, and we engage with other folks to talk about it. We make sure that we can really defend our position and back up our statements, and then get this stuff out there and try and add value and work with other folks. So what is the scat dog detection program all about? Step 1, we search the environment and collect scat samples from, in this case, caribou, moose, wolves, and deer. So number 2 then, this poo is sent to the lab in Washington in this case, and the lucky staff there get to take it apart and do all sorts of analysis on it, which I'll get into. That's very simply what the program is about in just 2 steps. There's a lot more to it, of course. But really, people ask, why do we want to use these detection dogs? And we get lots of questions about the dogs, so hopefully I'll answer them here for you. But number 1 is you find the dog, and we find that all the dogs that we use are some sort of lab props. They've got a good chunk of lab in them because of the retriever portion. They're all rescue dogs, local to Washington, where they pick them up. And they all have to have a very high ball drive. So this is where these dogs are obsessed with hitting that ball from you as their reward. And it's quite amazing when you see them. They are just nutcases to get that ball. They'll do anything. They would tangle with a herd of grizzly bear to get it or whatever. And they're truly driven, and they just are so fanatical. That's what makes it work. Then they get trained. So for example, when they came out to our spread last winter, they were looking for those 4 species. They get calibrated. We calibrate their noses to go look for those 4 species and just those 4 species. So when they charge off each day, they are looking for just those 4. If they come across coyote or elk or something else, they just pass it by and they go look for what they're tasked for that particular job. So keep in mind, these dogs travel around the world. They do Himalayan snow leopards in the Himalayas. They've done a variety of stuff in Africa. The coolest one, though, and I'm really sorry I don't have a slide, but I'll try and paint a picture for you. They do, one dog specializes in killer whales. So I got this slide, which I couldn't get hold of. I mean, I've seen it, couldn't bring it. Anyway, it's a killer whale, fully out of the water, pooping, big stream of poop. And the picture in itself is amazing, and if I had a pointer, I'd have so much fun showing you where this is. But the best part is the dog is on the boat, and they look for the whale poop, and the dog actually sits on the edge and steers the boat with his nose. And they go find this stuff. You've got 5 minutes maybe, floating time, scoop it up, and it works. These dogs can do that, so it's pretty amazing. So this is a bit of background. They go out, in our case, they go out to the boil forest in the winter, and they go through 3 or 4 feet of snow, and they find this stuff. Pretty amazing. So why do we use scat? I should have given the warning before this talk. There will be certain words used. Everyone poops. So guess what? This is really zero stress, totally non-invasive. The animal doesn't know we're doing this ever. Really. So it's really great for that. Now there's lots of other pros and cons to it, but from that side, absolutely no stress. And there's a lot you can do with poo. So here's all the different buckets we get from, for the DNA, we can do species, sex, individuals, and population sizes. And the endocrine stuff, we can get stress hormones, reproductive hormones, and nutritional information. For the diet, we can get their diet composition, and I'll get into that more. And from the locations, which are all GPSed, we can find out which habitats they prefer. It doesn't tell us about their movements, just other than very, not that kind of movement. That's not planned. They're big picture movements. So anyway, lots of information. That's the key. From those samples, look at all we can get, and we don't bother them collecting it. So I'm going to talk about some of the results here. So when we say not all features are the same, I'm talking about the linear disturbances primarily. So you heard Aaron this morning, in the in situ oil sands area where Statoil operates, there's a phenomenal amount of cut that's already occurred, and there's a lot more coming. And we're frantically trying to figure out how to reclaim that, how to minimize it in the first place, how to get it back faster, a whole bunch of things. But what we found was that for the foot, what we're calling the foot versus footprint. So when your foot's on the ground, that's when it's actually happening. In this case, the foot is when we are out there during the winter with the roads cleared and packed and drilling and shooting seismic and whatever else we're doing. It's a whole different scene for the wildlife compared to the next winter, if it's quiet and the snow is deep and there's no noise. Quite a difference there. So the disturbances and the lines the total problem. A lot of it is actual activity. And the other thing we found was that the nutrition of the caribou was lower near our presence, our industrial activity, and also according to the habitat type. So some very interesting stuff, all coming from the scat samples. Okay, just a bit on the range effects. So I won't ask you to squint at this slide very long. It's got some basic information. All you got to keep in mind here is we were studying in 3 different caribou ranges, and one had high lichen, and the other one had moderate, one had low. So not terribly surprising, but pretty good information to confirm for caribou in this case, because lichens are so important to caribou. The high ranges, they ate lots of, the high lichen ranges, they got lots of lichen in their diet, which resulted in a lower glucocorticoid level, which is important for pregnancy, so lower is better there, and a higher progesterone level, which is better for pregnancies as well. So I'll explain this a bit more as we go on about what this means to caribou pregnancy and survival rates and that sort of thing. But some very good relationships there, documented based on the scat collection. And then we can take the GPS information from the scat program and compare it to our RSF models, and it lines up pretty well. So that was another finding. Some more results. This one's interesting, just shows, again, through our study, that you've got deer and caribou habitat, 2 different graphs there. You notice on the left, the wolf and the caribou, or sorry, the wolf and the deer prefer the same habitat. They're basically lined up, a very good correlation. But then you move over to caribou, and it's inverse. So the caribou ecological niche is one of taking the lower quality habitats that the others didn't want, being solitary animals, eating lichen, which nobody else wants, and apparently it tastes really bad. I had a First Nations meeting yesterday in Fort McMurray, and they told me, one of the elders there told me they'll use it as survival food and they make porridge out of it. I said, well, how does that taste? I can't imagine. Well, like wallpaper paste. So caribou like it, works for them. They can extract the protein and the glucose out of it. But what this is showing is that their habitat avoidance is really spectacular here when you see it's inverse. So the wolves like to be where the deer are because they feast on deer more than anything. The caribou stay away by selecting different habitats. Another finding, population sizes. We have carried out, we've got results from 2 previous years. This past winter's will be number 3. We haven't analyzed the information yet, but we wanted to plot 3 points to form a curve for our population estimates, so we have some defensible numbers here. The numbers themselves aren't important because the numbers are low, and it's more a matter of can we use this to get those numbers? How important is it? Can we do this cheaper because it's not a cheap program? And what will this tell us? But this just gives you some information or an idea of what we can get. We can get relatively precise numbers here of populations. So getting into the 2013 program for our scat dogs, which has wrapped up, you know, the objectives here were determine abundance, distribution, and resource drivers of white-tailed deer. So we introduced deer for the first time. We wanted to talk about the impact of nutrition and human use on caribou reproductive health, not just the fact that they don't like it when people are around. We wanted to determine the population sizes of those 4 species and see if they've, the 3 species, and see if they've changed. So by adding white-tailed deer, we also undertook a project of installing large numbers of cameras, and the deer make the cameras go off a lot because they're just everywhere and they keep triggering them. So it's an infrared as well as a movement sensor, and we get thousands of pictures, and they're mostly Well, there's lots of humans because it's a busy landscape, but humans and deer. We've also seen cougars up there, but some really fascinating photos. Anyway, we want to find out what their habitat drivers are, their diet drivers, response to oil developments, and our reclamation efforts. That's for the deer. So that was new. For this year, we also expanded our program area and improved our design, and we wanted to sample more in a lichen poor range to get some better information about how they're dealing with poor lichen amounts available. Since caribou don't really move around, once they get their home ranges, if there's a fire comes through and wipes it out, they just suck it up and do poorly. And it's kind of funny that way, but we found that they don't really move around a whole lot. Okay, what else we did? We added extra dogs. We had 9 dogs out there because they get sore, they get tired, it's hard work. So a typical day would be maybe 6 hours. That would be maximum. And there's 1 dog and 1 handler. And they head out for the day. They go to their specified areas. They get dropped off. And they get picked up at the end of the day. And they just charge around all day. And early in the season, it was not so bad because the snow was deep and loose. The dogs were able to plow through it quite easily. As this past winter, we had all sorts of crazy weather. And crusting and warming up, and then all sorts of issues with that. And at one point, a couple of dogs had to be sent home early because they were all bruised up from crashing through ice over crust. So you can imagine if you had just a thin pair of pants on and you were blasting through icy crust all day, it wouldn't last too long. So neither did they, and they had to go back and